Okay.
And so if you want to go ahead and access that folder, that will give you just quick clicks to the resources for today.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So you have on the call with you today, um, Lauren Campbell, who is another data specialist, and Mary Paradinsky, who was our map coordinator. They are joining us today. So they'll be in the background. So if you have any questions that you don't want to interrupt me on, just put them in the chat. But feel free to stop me at any point in time. So we're going to talk today about using our student projections that are found in EVAAS. And these projections are used basically in triangulation with other data points to answer the question of how do we best support our students. And we often say, look at your EVAAS projections, see where students are supposed to land, but look at them in combination and in triangulation with other data points that can be used to actually speak to where students currently are, and then using EVAAS projections to talk about or to look at where students are historically coming from. And so we have our projections there just as another data point to support our decision making. Hopefully by the end of this session, there are two big things that we really want you to gain an understanding of. One, how to access your projections if you don't know how, and then how to interpret them. And then secondly, not supporting teachers, but teachers using, how do you use the projections to increase academic growth for all students? So if you've been through any of our other EVAAS presentations, you know that there are layers of reports, right? So we start with our school level reports, looking at value added and diagnostic, and then looking at our teacher level reports where we have individual value added and diagnostic reports. And now we're looking at the bottom layer being the core of it all, the student projections. So if you don't know these things, you may have questions about how to interpret those throughout the presentation. Just ask and we'll try to give you a brief overview of those if you don't remember. You know, EVAAS is one of the things, if you use it, you know it, but use it or lose it, right? And so we can do a quick refresher on that. So student projections, really, in essence, we want to know, how does EVAAS calculate student projections? And what they do is they look at the past history of a student, testing history in all subject areas, to predict where the child, assuming average progress in an average year, is likely to score, right? And they look at how all other students perform in relation to their own testing histories as well, right? So there are students who have taken the test and they have their own individual testing histories. And so we look at how did they perform on the assessment in relation to their testing history. And then they take all of this information and they calculate a projection for the student who has not taken the assessment, right? So we think of it as projecting where students' past testing history will land them in the state distribution, right? So here's another kind of visual of it. We got testing history for Sally, who has not taken English 1. And we are looking at her testing history relative and compared to people who have taken, students who have taken English 1 assessment, and their testing histories, right? And based on how they perform, and students who are who are academically similar to Sally, right? We look at all of those things and then we get a projected score for Sally, right? And so we'll say Sally's projected at the English 1 at their 65th percentile. So we do put this in here just as a note. Projections this year are based on prior testing history, assuming that the student had an average schooling experience, and those testing histories are coming from tests that were taken prior to changes in instructional delivery due to COVID. So nothing that is being used in projection is due to our shutdown, our work at home, our school at home situation. Right, everything was taken from data that was assessments that were assessed prior to COVID. We have in 2019, I want to say that they began to do 2-year projections anyway. So those projections were already set. And so that was the good thing about maybe somebody was looking ahead of time and thinking we need to do 2-year projections. So we already had projections that were set out for 2 years in advance. And so know that that data is historical data based on instructional delivery that happened before COVID. So how do we use projections? One, we can use them in a multitude of ways, and I think we get stuck on using them as like a placeholder, or this is where kids supposed to be at the end of the year. Several different ways we can use projections. One, anticipated student performance, right? That's what kind of the big thing. But then we also can use them about information to inform our decision of regarding extension programs, remediation, instructional support. How do we push our high kids, all those different things. We also can use them to motivate teachers and students regarding growth opportunities. We also can use them for things such as placement, right? Course placement. Or if we're doing a breakout and we want to, put teachers and students together for remediation purposes, what are the best teachers for what groups of students? So we can use them for so many different things. It's not just only how to just figure out where students are supposed to be at the end of the year. So when we dig into a little bit more, you may see some other things come out. There is a document in your folder, and it just outlines this information, who gets projections this year. And so it changes from year to year, depending on the weather, I always say. But K2 right now, there are no projections, and first and third grade math, right? And then also, we actually need to add in there fourth grade, because we don't really have any data to project for fourth grade, right? Third grade didn't take any assessments last year, so there's nothing to really base their performance off of. And so EOGs and EOCs, so we'll have third grade reading EOG, fifth and eighth grade math, fifth and eighth grade science, fifth through eighth grade reading. And then we'll have Math 1 and biology, and then we're going to have English 2 EOC. And if you are an English 2 or a high school person, the only scores you're going to get, or projections for English 2, are going to be the probability of students scoring above the 50th or above the 80th, just because we are in a renorming year and they're going through standard setting. And so that will be reset next year and will look like our normal projection reports. You find your EVAAS projections in EVAAS. If you have leadership access, you can find them in EVAAS under student projection report. If not, then you are going to find them in the Navigator portal. And so you want to, as a teacher, go to reports and EVAAS, and then EVAAS projections. It should say EOY summary or roster, one of the two. And that is where you're going to find your projections. And so let's just quickly review, because some of this you have to know to understand your projections. So we have a teacher here called Miss Maple. And if you know anything about value added, we see that Miss Maple has made good gains from 2018 to 2019, right? So Miss Maple has moved the bar for herself, her effectiveness, quite high, right? So 2018, she was like a negative, we're going to just guess negative 1.4. And then 2019, she shot up. She made some instructional changes. She got some support, some coaching, and she shot up to a 2.3, right? That is her value added. And then when we look at Miss Maple's diagnostic, we see that Miss Maple is growing her low kids, right? Her blue bar is above the green growth line. Her standard error bars are above the green growth line. That lets us know that all the kids in here are making moves in the right direction. And then her middle kids are really shining. They're really growing. And that standard error bar is far above the growth line, really giving us more evidence that this group is really making some moves. Her high kids on the other side, the growth line is here, blue bar is above it, but our standard error bars are crossing it, which is letting us know that we don't really have enough evidence that says these kids are growing or are not growing, right? So it's kind of like a mixed group of kids. Some may be, but some may also be falling behind and losing ground academically. So if we think about Miss Maple, how she's grown, what her current diagnostic data is for her low, middle, and high kids, What is likely to happen to Ms. Maple's teacher effectiveness data if Ms. Maple teaches an honors level class this year with a lot of high performing kids, and Ms. Maple continues to use the same strategies and resources she used last year when she fell into this exceeds growth? Any thoughts about that?
So if it's her high kids, she's not moving them as much. So they're most likely, not that they're going to go backwards, but they most likely will stay if she's using the same strategies.
Right. And her teacher effectiveness data, what do you think will happen with that?
It'll stay the same.
It can either possibly stay the same or it can go backwards. Yeah. Right.
So I have a question for you real quick.
Yeah.
So when you look at the 2018 and it's under the 0 line.
This one here?
On the right one. Go to the right. Yes. So the yellow.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean they went backwards?
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2018, she still had green data, although her kids moved backwards.
Yes, but if you look at her data, it was in the negative.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
But we're still considering that green.
Correct. So the range for meets growth is from a -2 to a +2. So we always say when you look at your numbers, always be thinking about, if I'm meeting growth, am I in the negative or am I in the positive? Because if I'm in the negative, that means that there are some kids that are pulling me to the negative side that have lost ground academically.
Okay.
Right. But then there also in that group might be a few here or there that actually made some growth. So you actually have to dig in a little deeper to see actually who the kids are and where they made some moves to. But definitely, if you look at this year, you can see why this is in the negative meets.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Good question. All right. So correct. So we hypothetically would say that if she does not change the practices that she made with her high kids, that she probably wouldn't stay in this sixth growth. And she might drop back a little bit. She might not drop all the way back to the red, but she might drop back a little bit because her class landscape has changed, right? She's got more high performing students. And that's kind of where she's not, I want to say she struggles because they're still above the green line, but this is where she's not making the most growth in comparison to the other groups that she has in her class. So let's talk about Mr. Birch. Mr. Birch is on the trajectory of greatness here. You know, this was his first year teaching, maybe. He didn't do too hot, but he was learning the content. He was learning how to classroom management. He was learning all the different things, right? And then in 2018, Mr. Birch got a coach. He did some PD. He did some extra stuff on his own, and he moved his bar up. So he was probably at we call this deep red, but he was in the red at maybe a 3.6 or something negative. He came on up in 2018 to almost a -1, maybe a -0.9. Good gains. And then in 2019, he continued on his growth, and he is now almost approaching the exceeds. He's at a 1.5 or 1.6. So we see this trajectory. We know that he is on the right path. And then we're going to look at his diagnostic. So his diagnostic data is telling us in 2019, his low kids grew, right? His standard error bars are above the green line. His blue bar is above the green line. This is no doubt that this group of students made some academic gains. Then our middle of the road kids, they are above the blue line. The blue bar is above the green line. My standard error bar, one standard error is above. The other one right now crosses it, which lets us know that there may be some kids who lost ground academically here. And then when we come here to our high kids, we see that our blue bar is above the green growth line, but our standard error bars are widely crossing this growth line, which is letting us know that there is a wide range of learners in here of where people grew and where people receded. Right. And so once again, we have this mixed group of kids where some may have grown all the way up to, let's say, 6 or so index, and then some may have dropped to a 5 index. And so we can't really say that this is not a group that we can say that actually grew. So hypothetically speaking, what would happen to his teacher effectiveness data if Mr. Birch is teaching a class with a wide range of learners, some coming in well below grade level, some right on track, and some performing above? What happens to his data if Mr. Birch continues to use the same strategies and resources he used last year when he fell into the meets category? But he also attends trainings on meeting the need of high performing students and implement strategies learned. He still maintains a focus on grade level expectations for all students and intentionally plans scaffolds for those that will need them. What will happen to Mr. Birch's data?
So hopefully, the high performing kids will go up because he's been coaching and he's focusing on growing in that area. And then the low and mediums should continue to stay if he's continuing to excel and use the same strategies.
Correct. Yes. And so what we want teachers and leaders to know is like, we use our projections not by themselves. We use them in combination with our diagnostic reports because it gives us a pathway for our own teacher development, right? So now, if I only look at this value added report and I say that I'm in the green, or if I'm Miss Maple and I look at my value added report and I say that I'm in the blue, I'm good. I don't need to learn anything. I'm teacher of the year. Well, what happens is I miss the opportunity for growth in terms of which groups of kids am I not meeting, right? So my high kids for both teachers, right? And what professional development do I need to improve my craft so that I am maximizing growth for all students? And so we want to use our projections in combination with our diagnostic report to look at what did I do in the past and who is currently sitting in my class now. So let's talk about that. When we get our projections, we get them with projected state percentiles, right? And so when you access this in Navigator Portal, it may look slightly different, but you're going to get all this information, who the student is, what their probability is of landing in different levels. And then you're going to get their state projected percentile and their projected level. Right. And so what we ask that teachers do is we ask you to, one, sort and in Navigator Portal, you can sort this by just clicking on state projected percentile, the little arrow. You want to sort this from lowest to highest percentile. That's step one. You always want to sort them from lowest to highest percentile. Right. So this is telling me that Tanwi is going to be, it's projected to be at the first percentile. Right. And his probability of being on grade level is a 0.1%. So we know that he's probably not going to be on and this probably gets at grade level proficiency, right? Your chart will show a little differently. It will actually say level 3, 4, or 5, right? And so once we sort those, what we want to do is we want to divide them into thirds. And when I said that, we want to divide them into thirds based on their percentile. So we draw a line at the 33rd percentile. So if you're in Navigator Portal, you can export this. You can do it by colors, right? Or if you want to print it out and draw on it, fine, because you can always print and export to CSV or Excel in Navigator Portal. So you want to draw a line at the 33rd, and then you want to draw another line at the 66th percentile. So we're looking at what kids are falling in from 0 to 33, 34 to 66, and then 67 to 99. So you'll have these 3 different chunks of kids. Then you want to label your chunks. The first top one, lowest, middle, for the middle group, obviously. And then for the bottom group, this is your highest group. If you do this, what you have basically created are these groups of students, right? So now, if I'm looking, I can see how did I do with the lowest group of students that I had last year or the last testing year, right? How many of those students, how many do I have in that group currently? Is it more? Is it about the same? What have you, right? And if I keep my practices the same, or is it logical for me to keep my practices the same, right? And so in this situation, this particular teacher, yeah, look at this data. You are growing your low kids. We need to probably just grow upon what we already have in place, right? No need to toss it and trash it, right? Grow upon what we already have in place. But if I look at my high group, right, and maybe this was only, I don't know, 5 kids or so, who knows? I want to compare, how did I do with my high kids, right? How many high kids did I have? How many high kids do I have now, right? If it's the same number, I still am below the green standard line. My standard error bars are telling me that this group of kids lost ground academically. What am I going to do differently, right? And so here, the idea with our high kids are, sometimes we kind of miss that because they still get 4s and 5s, right? They're still getting those 3, 4s, and 5s. They're still showing proficiency, but they're losing ground academically because they're not actually doing as well as they did in the past, right? And so they are considered losing ground academically because they should have been either maintaining or going above where they actually ended in the past, right? And so we want to use these things in combination. So we use this one as a tool to see where students should land at the end of the year, right? And it's just a probability, not a self-fulfilling prophecy, but where they should land at the end of the year. But we also use it as a tool to begin to look at our own teaching and say, where are my deficits and where should I be growing in order to meet the needs of these 3 different groups? And so these are just reflection questions that you could use. If history were to repeat itself in your class, how might certain students perform on the end of year assessments? So choosing a kid from the lowest, the middle group with the high group is kind of seeing, if I continue to do what I'm doing, how will so-and-so, how will Tamara perform on the end of year assessment, right? Note the number of students in each achievement group on both reports. So how many kids did I have last year in the high group? How many kids do I have currently projected in the high group, right? And thinking about, if my instructional practices remain the same, how will my growth results change in next year's report? Thinking about, what are 2 professional growth goals that I might want to establish for the current year for myself? And then also thinking about, if these are my growth goals, what support am I going to need and who do I need to go to access that support? Right? So it's really connecting the past to the present, right? Connecting the past to the present. So in your folder, in the digital folder, there is a teacher reflection activity. And it just basically walks you through the same steps that we kind of just talked through. So first thing you want to do is access your diagnostic report in EVAAS, and then you want to write down your growth from last year. So for each of these groups, low, middle, and high, in your chart, you will get a growth index, right? And so if I was this teacher, I might have been at a positive 9.7 for this group, right? And then for this group, I might have been at a positive 5. And then this group, I would write -3, right? So that is my, and I'm just kind of going off of looking at it from a distance, that would be my growth from the last tested year. Step 2 is to access your projections, right? So now we're going to look in the Navigator portal and look at our projections. We're going to either export it, we're going to divide our groups, or divide our students into 3 groups, low, middle, and high, and you want to put the names of those students here. Now, if you teach high school, I always say this, you can just export it and color code it because nobody has time to write in 90 different names, right? It's a little easier when you got a class of 25, like 3rd graders, but when you teach 90 kids, you don't have it. So if you want to export it and highlight the colors, or if you want to cut and paste it, fine. But it's nice to have on that sheet, when you look at it up here at this top part, top middle, you're going to see your growth from last year, and then you're going to see how many kids are now sitting in those groups. And so it kind of highlights for me, what's my focus area, right? So if this is -5 and I've got a list of kids here, right, then I know, oh goodness, I've got to do something different here. Step 3 is to reflect on current and past practices and instructions. If you use the same practice, consider if they will render the same results. If the results are positive, how can you capitalize and continue to grow students in those groups? And if the results are negative, then what resources and supports will you need to change that trajectory? And consider the questions and other implications below. So thinking about, what are the implications for this year? instructional implications, support implications. What are some things that you're thinking about when you look at these groups of this data and these groups of students? What does it mean going forward? Right. And I know it's a little later in the year right now, but it's never too late just to kind of stop and level set again to see, am I on the right track? Are my students working toward those actual projections? Just to level set and to do a temperature check, right? I also want just to mention that when you look at your projections, I'm going to not get us dizzy for a moment. When you look at your projections, and I hear this a lot, we've got here Viviana, who's projected to be at the 86th percentile, or Bill, who's at the 91 percentile. Know that our projections come based on testing history, right? It is not based on classroom data. So what I hear people often say is, how is Bill supposed to get here? How is he probability of being at 91? And how is he supposed to be at the 91 state percentile? He doesn't do any work in class. He's got a 1.1 GPA. This has nothing to do with what he does in the classroom. This is all based on testing history. So I always say it's a thing of skill versus will. Obviously, his testing history tells us that he has the skill. He has all of the skills needed to perform, but he lacks the will to do the work in the classroom, right? And so we just have to keep in mind that these numbers have nothing to do with what we see on a daily basis. It has to do with how they have been performing since they have took any test in North Carolina. I always plug that in because sometimes you will see, and not often, but sometimes you will see just a huge discrepancy like, whoa, how he's projected to be where? Because this is not based on anything subjective. It's all objective data, right? And so that's where we get these projections from. And with that, that brings us to our conclusion. So if you need any support, and I know we kind of like briefly reviewed these teacher reports, but if you need some more support digging into your teacher reports and connecting them to student projections, please feel free to reach out. There is a reports guide in your folder that goes through the different reports and also gives the description and just some guiding questions to help as you are looking at that report. And then, as always, there are our Ducey resources. So there is the Google site that we have that has resources on all things, not just EVAAS, but all things. And then we also have a Canvas site, which will have a coming up EVAAS course once we get it up and running with our new reports that have been given to us, gracious of EVAAS. And then, other than that, do you have any questions for us?